Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Infinite Imaginarium. And today we're focusing on brain connections. And we have a pretty good panel today. We have Tech Lords, we have Be Down Smart, we have Nikki, we have Jim from the Scenario Project, and we have Holly and Lee. And so basically, I'm going to let Nikki start off the discussion and frame where we're going to go with the brain connections and get deep into the infinite imaginarium.
Hello. Okay, well, uh, really, the sort of first thing that I want to touch upon, just to start it off, you know, obviously with the human brain, we need to understand that in sort of many respects that it's the commander in chief, if you like, of, or the master in chief of all the biological functions of the body, in a physiological sense. So its function, in a sense, is to utilize, the organs of the body in that way. But also, I wanted to sort of talk about, how we perceive our unique world, as an individual, how we decode our reality. So the reason I termed it brain connections is because I wanted to sort of look at the relationships between what we term as triggers and emotions. So it's something that an anchor, something that occurs that will trigger a certain feeling in us. So, sometimes we can see a scenario playing out, and we might, as an outsider, so it's not actually happening to us, we might see a scenario playing out between two people. We see a certain person react in a certain way, and some of us might go, God, I can really understand why they reacted in that way. But the other half of us might say, I don't know why they got so stressed about that. It just seems, it seems really, not that important. Because what happens is throughout our life, a mixture of nature and nurture, we create a program within our psyche or within our brain where we, a scenario will happen where it will trigger us to have a reaction. In terms of NLP or, non-layman's terms, we call it an anchor. So you can have positive anchors. So for example, a positive anchor could be like just looking at a piece of chocolate could evoke a certain feeling of bliss and, euphoria even before you've even tasted it or touched it or put it in your mouth. A negative anchor could be something really stupid. So for example, you could be going along, in your life, having a great day, and then all of a sudden somebody looks at you, or it could be a work colleague looks at you in a certain way, they have a certain way of smiling at you that immediately evokes an emotion. So the thing is with anchors, they're instantaneous. It's not a case of there's like a time lag where a little bit of time and then all of a sudden you feel bad. You can literally go from feeling absolutely fantastic to feeling absolutely horrendous, in terms of it being a negative anchor for no reason whatsoever. And you're thinking, why am I started off the day really well, now I'm feeling really bad. Because what happens is within the programming, it's just a key thing, and sometimes it's unconscious. It's not something that you're consciously aware of, and you think, oh, that's why I feel bad now. Something happens, but you don't know what it is that makes you change your emotional status. So that was kind of what I wanted to talk about, is, how we relate to other people, and the confusion of having different perspective on things. And it's all kind of down to the programming, the individual programming, if that makes sense. So that's
Yeah,
kind of what I wanted to go into to begin with.
yeah, I like that because earlier too, so like we create kind of our perspective of reality, and the brain's role is to instantly interpret the data that's coming in from us. And thus it's influenced by sociology and our own psychology makeup. And for instance, what you were saying about chocolate, like chocolate for you might be something that's wonderful and blissful, but for me, actually, because when just a little bit of my background, I've been allergic to milk, so chocolate for me triggers a bad negative feeling. I'm like, oh, chocolate, because I get upset stomach and I don't care for
So that
chocolate.
would
But
be a
somebody,
negative trigger,
yeah,
a negative anchor for you, yeah.
yeah, because of my growing up and my little experiences with it having being negative when I was young. And so, but also too, any words or whatever can mean different things to different people. And this is where we have a lot of semantic noise when we're trying to communicate to people. And especially, I think recently too, in the Minds community, we've been having a lot of this noise of words and communications when we're recently. I've been noticing there's been a lot of lively debates going on. But
Yeah.
anybody else want to be damn smart?
I don't think you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I think you muted yourself, Jim.
Yeah, there's such a delay before the red light goes off there and goes back on. I guess my computer's dying here, but I think the key here is I guess what they were talking about in Banerjee's book Blind Spot: The Hidden Biases of Good People. And if you have a smell of something and something bad happens, that smell will induce this negative feeling, which is illogical and unproductive. And we make associations based on serendipity or synchronicity of things that happen in our lives, and make and get feelings that can result in actions based on associations that have no logical basis. They just happen to be coincidental. And these blind spots um, um, are the things that I guess we're getting into later in the discussion of how we can identify whether a feeling that we're having is rational and whether it's a positive or negative. Uh, uh, you were calling it. It's an attractor mathematically. Where's the agenda? What did you just call it?
The anchor or the
Anchors,
trigger. Yeah.
anchors. Well, you have an anchor is basically the connective part between a trigger and an emotion. So it's basically the individual specific thing that occurs that triggers the emotion in someone. But it's one of the key things to remember is that it's instantaneous and often it's unconscious. So and what you were saying, Badam Smart, is absolutely right in the sense that the confusion with each individual person and trying to unravel why we feel the certain way we do. One minute we're fine, the next minute we're not. So a lot of people go through their life as a kind of roller coaster of emotions, is that we have the 5 basic senses or modalities. So we've got the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, which is obviously smell, and gustatory, which is taste. And then you have what we call submodalities, which are they're basically each modality, and then each modality has like a subtle nuance. So, for example, in terms of visual, you can describe an image as being black or white, or colour, or you can describe it as being bright or dim. Sounds could be loud or soft or coming from a particular direction. And this is when it gets really complicated because most people fall into one or two of those categories, you know, or they're predominantly one category or another. Some people are predominantly visual. Some people are a sort of an equal 50-50 combination of visual and auditory. Some people are like 98% kinesthetic, so they're feeling. You know, if you speak to somebody, one of the key things is the words that they use. If somebody is very kinesthetic, they will often say, I feel this, I feel that, because they feel everything sort of right in the depths of the pit of their stomach, you know, the gut instincts that we always talk about. A visual person, if you're sat in front of a visual person and they're talking about something, they will frequently look up into the sky, or sort of as they are recalling a memory, they will look upwards because they are visualizing it in their mind. So some people are visual, some people are, you know, and weirdly, if you say to somebody, think of an elephant, you know, it's just a random thing. Strangely, not all, I mean, this is quite a rare thing, strangely, some people actually think of the word elephant. So, you know, if you wrote the word elephant down on a piece of paper, some people actually visualize that word in their head. They don't actually visualize a picture of an elephant, which is really weird. Most people would visualize an elephant, but anyway, that's just one weird example of how people decode their reality. And obviously, this sort of impacts on our relationships with people, because we may perceive something in a certain way, and often we will argue with other people about almost trying to persuade them, almost as if we're trying to get them to see reason, and you know, how can you possibly say that, or how can you possibly see something in that way? And it's all down to the individual programming, but you know, individual programming cannot fall into sort of these black and white listed formatted categories. It's so diverse and so what's the word, complex. It's so complex. This is why, you know, relationships between people are so complicated, and you know, these disagreements occur because we all decode things in a different way. And it's like certain people, you know, going into the realms of like assimilation of knowledge and information that we have. If people only have a certain sized amount of information, they can only decode their reality or decode the whole, you know, the bigger picture in a small fraction of what the entirety of the picture is, or the entirety of the jigsaw puzzle. They've only got, say, you know, one person might only have 3 sections of the jigsaw puzzle. Another person might only have 1 section. Another person might have, you know, 89 pieces of the 100-piece jigsaw puzzle. And then you have all these people communicating with each other, and depending on where their perceptual position is, in terms of how much of the information they have, they are trying to show the other person who only has, say, 1 piece of the puzzle, their perspective, where they have 89 pieces of the puzzle. The person who only has 1 piece of the puzzle hasn't got a clue of what they're on about. It's just kind of going over the top of their head. So these disagreements and frictions can occur. But, you know, that's sort of going into a much deeper level of it. But in general sort of day-to-day life, in terms of improving your relationships with people, or improving yourself, you know, I guess on a selfish level, if you can unravel the wiring, the programming, if you can actually bring that out, expose that programming in your brain, you can expose triggers and anchors, and you can change things accordingly. So if you have a repeated scenario in your life, or a repeated thing that keeps happening, you can, you know, there's things you can do to expose the wiring in your brain. and you can actually change the program
Yeah.
on
Actually,
a physiological level, anyway. So yeah.
Be Damn Smart, I think this would be a good time. I saw you in the chat. You want to go over the personality types briefly?
Well, I guess oh, there's an echo. Is there an echo on your end, or is that just me?
No, just you.
No,
You,
you
you
sound
sound
good.
good.
Fine.
Okay. Then actually, I'm gonna have to. There we go. How about the heart? Well, we'll start off with the heart because we were talking about the brain, but you can probably agree that the heart actually makes some decisions on its own also. And any boyfriend or girlfriend or past love or hard love, the heart's going to let you know. And it has more or less the same wiring, so it's the same sensors, and they're both connected, internally connected. So the effect of how the heart and the mind may be working as one unit or organism to keep you alive. So, but you can't get away from the fact that it is making some decisions. So, and then I would want to move to the state changes. So you enter a state and you're expressing an emotion. How do you change that emotion, or how do you change that state? Well, you can only express things if you maintain a body position. So if you get into your, oh, I feel weak and sad and all this state, your body will go into a certain memory recall and you'll gain that position, but you can only feel that emotion in that position. So in order to change that state, all you have to do is start changing things with your body, like move your head from a position that it's in. If your arms are crossed, uncross them. If your feet are a set distance apart, change how your feet are. So by changing your position, your body position, you can interrupt that programming, and it can't run that state that you're, well, let's just say if you want to get out of that state, that's how you change that state. So just even a smile alone can induce you into a smile state, or just like if you watch somebody yawn, that's a trigger that will cause you to yawn. And then actually, you wanted me to clear up the curses. The 16 personality types. So obviously, you're a feeler. So you express things in the feely type, and you make decisions based on feelings. Where I'm a T, or I'm an INTJ, but the T is the thinking part, and that's how I make my decisions or whatever. So I never let my feelings get in the way of the thinking of through the facts of the logic of what's presented. So I don't really get those feely things. But yeah, there are 16 different types, and you have to take this test, and then you can find out how you make decisions, whether you're introverted, extroverted, intuitive, sensor, you're a perceiver, or you're a justifier. But you have to more or less take the test and then figure out where you're actually on the border at, or you're just a clear line hardcore kind of person in each of those 4 different personality types, and each of them has two different areas you could be in. Back to you.
I like that about, I use kind of like humor, like especially if I'm in a bad mood or whatever, then I'll start to laugh, and that kind of like changes my whole state. But I think Jim was gonna chime in a little bit about the blind spots and feelings a little bit.
Well, yeah. We had an interesting discussion in the Cybercom group, which has distinguished people like Stuart Brand and Lee Kaufman, you know, a whole spectrum of people from the cybernetics community. It was on research indicating that suggested that people are not swayed by facts generally. The neurology of it they associated with the stomach, not the heart. But certainly we think with our whole body, and the heart and the stomach are part of that. Our gut feeling. We rationalize the facts afterwards that we want to consider. New facts rarely have any effect on anything we feel strong about. And you know, I think that Nicole, you know, hit the nail on the head in terms of because we associate feelings irrationally with ideas, it affects our beliefs, and we need to identify those misassociations in order to overcome the blind spot that we have in terms of logic. So we may be a very logical person, we may be a thinking person, but we still have blind spots.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Certain words or certain things that trigger something for you. And I think what Nikki was saying is important, that, you know, kind of take inventory of your life and see what are some of your habits or some of your emotions where you're like, why am I keep on repeating this? And I kind of to say, well, let me break out of this habit. But
I think that's great advice. Just changing your position, you know, can change your disposition. And I mean, I do things like I'll slap myself across the face when I, you know, just hit myself on the side of the head. You know,
it's literally to change the direction of the neural pathway.
Right, you're getting the slap.
In a sense, you're propelling yourself into another direction, breaking apart that connection.
Right, we're creatures of habit, and if we have a stimulus and we respond to it in a certain way, because that's what gives us a stroke, then giving it a slap will program it the other way.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is that we are creatures of habit. That's why new facts or data is so hard for us to get integrated into us, because we have to build a new neural network for that, and have it associated for us. And some of the times, you know, we're running on these emotions and programming, you know, instantaneously from our past, and if we don't, you know, if we ignore a lot of whatever, because everybody kind of has baggage or a bias or whatever, and if we don't always kind of like, I know I got into the habit of when I get offended or I have a negative emotion or whatever to what someone else tells me, then I kind of like, I in a sense, I do it metaphorically, slap myself in the face. I'd be like, what the heck, Daniel, like, what's wrong with you? Like, get over yourself. Like, what is the real reason you're upset? And it usually has to do with something that maybe one of my insecurities or it's a touchy subject for me personally or whatever. And I'm like, okay, because, you know, ultimately you are responsible for yourself and in charge of your own emotions and the way you act towards different things.
Right. The you know, the Programming Human Biocomputer was a great book my father loved. He said to me earlier when I was frustrated trying to get people to be reasonable, he said, you can't tell someone something they don't already know, which isn't exactly right, but it's central to this. And
Yeah.
And I forget.
That's kind of I phrase it a little differently. I like, oh, people only hear and see what they want to hear and see. You know, when you get so frustrated, you're like, why don't you see my point of view? But
And it's so true, though. That is so,
yeah.
you know, it's not even a case of, oh, they've just, because when we sort of say that as a throwaway kind of thing, it's like, oh, it's almost like implying that they've chosen to see something like that. But actually, they actually do see it like that. It's almost as though you're speaking to them in a language that they don't understand. They literally can't decode it. It's like the thing that I was saying about the jigsaw puzzle. If they only have a small piece of the puzzle, and you have, like, you know, more pieces of the puzzle, you're trying to explain it to them from your perspective with more pieces of the puzzle, but they only have one piece, so they can only see it from the perspective of having one piece. So it's kind of literal that they cannot see it. That's kind of the difficult thing. But I mean, in terms of, like, on an individual scale, if you notice these repeated patterns happening in your life, you know, it's repeated behaviours, almost as though you're really unlucky, you know, in terms of negative things, because it can also work conversely in the positive. But in terms of negative things, these things keep repeating in slightly different formats, and you're starting to think, hang on a minute, there's a bit of a pattern going on here. The minute that you start to become conscious of your negativity feeling state, or the minute you become conscious of how you feel, you know, of the times when you start to feel bad, all you have to do is retrace your steps from when you feel bad. It can literally be from, you know, the last few minutes or the last few hours to when you felt okay, and then you find the trigger. You will actually be able to identify what the trigger is. Once you can identify all the triggers in the program, in the wiring, you can deconstruct it, and you can rewire the program. You can reprogram, and basically eradicate all those repeated scenarios or unwanted feeling states, or things, you know, unwanted feeling states that then lead to scenarios or situations that seem as though things are repeating in your life, like repetitive negative relationships, or repetitive relationships with work colleagues, or whatever it may be, or eating habits, or any kind of unwanted habit or unwanted feeling states, and that then trigger more scenarios that you don't want. So it's literally a case of, you know, I always say to people, just write everything down. You could literally have like a diary or a journal. It sounds really weird. If you notice a thing that keeps happening or repeating, so say, you know, just for one example, say you've got some sort of eating issues. It could be an overeating thing. You know, you just overeat all the time, so you're thinking, right, you know, why am I doing it? Every time you have any sort of association with food or any connection with food, write down all your thoughts, even the thoughts that seem unrelated or irrelevant. Write everything down. Do it for a period of about 3 months, because I guarantee that in 3 months you will have the whole program, and you'll be able to identify all the triggers. So if I'm setting somebody a task to help them, that's what I would advise them to do. You will uncover all the triggers, and then you can set about rewiring. You know, you can eradicate those triggers, and then what you can then do on a more conscious level, like we were talking about before, when you feel that negative emotion coming around you, or feeling or urge to do something that you don't want to do, you do something totally kind of in the opposite direction to generate a different emotion, a different feeling, which then propels you into a different direction. So if I was sat with a client, for example, and we were stagnating on a particular point, they weren't progressing or moving forward, I would do something as a therapist to propel them into a different direction or urge them into a different direction, which sounds a bit weird and manipulative. It could be something really dramatic, you know. I mean, depending on the situation, I could be sat there. If I had a glass of water on the table, depending on how extreme the stagnation was, I would just, you know, stand up to do something and nonchalantly knock the water onto the floor to get a reaction from that person, just to change their direction, not to manipulate them or do anything negative, just to change their state of mind. And it was like Satori, you were saying earlier about how you know, humour, you use humour, or you know, some people use music. Anything that generates a different, you know, evokes a different emotional state will change the direction of the repetitive neuro pathway, so you can do it. But obviously when you become conscious of the patterns by writing everything down or whatever system you want to use, you can then actually, you know, fine-tune your ability to identify those repetitive patterns or triggers, and then the ones that you don't want, you can eradicate, and you can literally rewire the program using certain techniques or using things that help you in certain situations. You know, it might be certain things. If you want to evoke a calm feeling because you feel anxious in a certain situation, you would go about an activity that would induce a calm feeling, or you would, you know, if you needed to induce a sort of a high energy state, you might listen to a certain piece of music that evoked a high energy state feeling. You know, if it was like you had to go into an interview or you were about to do some sort of public speaking event and you're normally a really nervous person but you had to speak in front of thousands of people, you would perform an activity before that public, you know, speaking event that would evoke a high energy state, and then go and speak to all those people. So there's little things you can do, but obviously in terms of just general repetitive scenarios, if you know, if you can uncover the program, you can obviously change it from within.
So Nikki,
Rewire yourself.
Would you agree that the program that's running is trying to protect you from an emotion or expressing an emotion from maybe a wrong direction of authentic self, or even just I believe some females maybe eat ice cream to build up a protective layer from that feeling, so it's kind of like it's just a way of self-protection, but it's due to an emotion. So I think with the NLP, one of the techniques is to identify what that emotion or that problem is, and then maybe trying to get it out, change its direction, and replanting it somewhere else, or even dumping it altogether.
Do you mean, you know, if somebody's got a hidden intention, in terms of they want to do a certain thing, but they're perhaps not consciously aware of it? So
right.
There's something in NLP that we talk about called hidden intention and secondary gain. So, for example, say you had, this is just an example that I'm throwing in here to sort of demonstrate what I'm talking about, and so you get a sort of a better understanding. Say you take a person who has got a job, they work very hard in their job, and they decide that they hate their job, they hate their boss, it's literally ruining their life, it's ruining all their relationships, you know, personal relationships. So they go and have therapy with somebody, and then they're sort of talking to the therapist and saying, oh God, I hate my job, it's so awful and horrendous and everything. And then as things unravel, it transpires that, you know, they're very resistant to changing anything. They don't want to change their job, yet they hate it. They don't want to do anything different, you know, yet they hate it. So they hate their boss, they hate the job. But then when things are being discussed, it's like, well, no, I can't change my job because it'll be too much hassle and blah, blah, blah. And as more things evolve, as more things come out, it transpires that this individual has a terrible relationship with her husband or wife. Anyway, to cut a long story short, what I'm trying to get at, quite often people consciously think there's something in their life that they need to change that is causing them some sort of major unhappiness. They think that is the thing they need to change, or that is the thing that's making them unhappy, but in actual fact it's something else underlying. So, for example, if this lady is saying, or man is saying, I hate my job, yet they're resistant to changing it, the secondary gain is the fact that they will go to that job and work those nights, which is detrimental to the family, personal life, and their relationship with their husband or wife, because they don't get on with their husband and wife, and they want to get away from that person. But they think the job is the sole thing that is giving them the unhappiness or making them feel unhappy, when in actual fact, you know, the hidden intention is to get away from the husband or wife, not the job. The secondary gain is to continue with the job that they so say hate, to get away from the husband or wife, if that makes sense. So sometimes what I'm saying is people think that there's an aspect of their life that's making them unhappy, when in actual fact it's just something else that they haven't really perhaps faced up to, that they're using this other thing that they hate, apparently, to get away from this other thing that actually is causing them the most unhappiness. But it's not always a conscious thing. You know, a lot of people will come to you and they believe that it is the job, you know, in terms of the example I just used, that is causing the unhappiness. But actually when things unravel, because NLP isn't like psychotherapy, it's different in the sense that, you know, people kind of unravel it themselves, as opposed to you giving them, you know, cues to say things, in a sense, or giving them more help. They kind of unravel it themselves. That's on a very base level, obviously, but so that's kind of the whole thing about hidden intentions and secondary gains. So quite often people will think something is what's causing the unhappiness, yet they will continue with something to stop having to acknowledge something else. So they will continue with something that makes them unhappy, and the secondary gain to continuing with something that makes them unhappy is to not acknowledge or not face up to something else that is making them feel bad. So the hidden intention is to not acknowledge that thing by carrying on with that thing that they hate.
Yeah,
it's the same thing that happens when you have transference of pain. You know, you hit your arm so your leg doesn't hurt or whatever. The case where this happens very often is transference of a problem we have to other people. You know, my wife blames me for whatever happens in her life. Okay, and
sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. Yeah. I was laughing because I was relating to what you said there. Anyway, go on, carry on.
And you know, because you know, I may have masochistic tendencies or something. It doesn't. I don't care what other people think. So it, you know, it kind of bounces off me, and it usually ends up in a joke. So it works out well. But you know, I come to accept that everything's my fault, and you know, that's sort of, it makes her feel better. I don't know if it makes her deal with her problems. I mean, if you discover that, you know, anytime you think about work, you get depressed or anxious, Okay, you may have a real problem at work that you have to deal with, and changing your feeling about it is not dealing with the problem. Or, you know, if you're concerned every time you're spending money, do you have a real financial problem, or are you just being over anxious for no purpose? So when you reprogram these gut reactions, you have to judge whether or not um, it is an improper or illogical reaction, um, or a normal one. I mean, I found that, depression is a time of, pruning. You have a time of blooming and pruning, and the depression is very valuable to me. And
Depression should never be suppressed. I've always said this with tablets or anything else. Depression is for me, I personally believe depression is an enlightenment. It's a person going through a period of introspection, and it shouldn't be suppressed at any point, even
Absolutely.
though it may be uncomfortable. It's a period of introspection, of going inward.
Yeah, and you have to realize, you have to think, and you have to figure out now. So why? What is the purpose of this depression? Why am I? What is? And sometimes it's not a reasonable thing. Okay, sometimes it just needs to be reprogrammed. Like you have to discover the root of it before you know what it is. And even if it's an irrational depression, you discover a blind spot and you become a great hunter because you've eliminated one of your blind spots.
Yeah, and I think too that the suppression of whatever that emotion is leads to that kind of protecting that barrier of whatever quote unquote a vice, eating or a substance or spending money or whatever that kind of and it gets you in the self perpetuating habit. And I think too also it leads to what Be Young Smart was kind of saying in the chat of some self-sabotage. Because maybe you didn't deal with your depression, so you said, oh, maybe I'm not worthy to, maybe in the relationship to be loved, or I'm not worthy to have some success in your business or whatever. And I think it varies in the scale of that. But Be Young Smart, did you want to add anything to the self-sabotage that to get in line with authentic self?
Actually, just authentic self by itself, you're gonna have problems. So like what I tried to relate it to was reptilian brain tells you sameness equals safety. So you continue to go to that job and you continue to do that because it worked yesterday, so why won't it work today? And I just keep doing it when you're self-sabotaging yourself at work because you don't want to be there. so that's the gist of the self-sabotage. You're trying to get more in line with yourself, and whenever you're not, your body is going to bring up things that cause it to come to the forefront to make you deal with it. I mean, your body's always going to win.
Yeah, that is true. And then a lot of times too, that suppression of those emotions manifests into something kind of like physical pain of some sort.
Yeah, you always have to express whatever emotion, because if you don't, then that's going to cause another problem. So anytime you do have an emotion, go ahead and express it, because you don't want to hold that kind of thing in.
Yeah, and kind of going back to what they're talking about, the depression or just feeling sad and feeling that emotion. Literally, crying is cleansing process for you, and I always found that interesting.
May I
Tech
jump
Lords.
in? Yeah, I'd like to jump in here. I've been listening to everyone. I'm just gonna take 1 or 2 minutes. In my view, emotions are always triggered by thoughts and by the egoic reflection in the mind. in other words, subjective thinking. If there was no reflection in the mind, so in other words, if we would look at or observe our thoughts objectively, there would be no emotions. We'd be in like a neutral state. The ego is always conditioned to reflect because of three main factors. The first one is education. The second one, influences. And the third reason, probably the most important, is the astrological programming. So we're programmed to do certain things. The soul has to go through certain experiences in order to gain, experience. So anybody that feels pain, is sad, depressed, it's all caused by the trigger. Actually is the reflection in the mind, always. Because if you don't reflect on a thought or an event, there can't be any pain, there can't be any loss of energy. So if you're objective, you integrate the energy of these thoughts instead of losing energy by reflecting on them. So that's my view on it.
I'm not sure exactly. When you have a reaction, it's knee jerk. Okay, it's a habit. It's programmed. I can't remember how you worded that. And at that point, you have to determine whether or not that reaction was objective or not. And most of our reactions are very good. If we didn't live by these automatic reactions, we couldn't live a day. I mean, we can't think everything out. And our gut reaction serves us pretty well. It keeps us alive and successful in many cases. In reprogramming ourselves, okay, when we identify a positive or negative anchor, there's always a question of objectivity associated with that anchor. But if we don't identify the anchors, we're not really going to be objective.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm going to add a few things here. Not only are we astrologically programmed, but most people don't even know how the thinking process works. Most people don't really know that there are multidimensional. They believe that they are producing these thoughts in their mind. I've come to learn through experience that thoughts do not originate in the mind, not in the physical mind anyways. They originate from another dimension of ourselves, and these thoughts are always sent for testing purposes. But if you understand how the thinking process works, you understand how the mind operates, how to not reflect on any thoughts that is sent to your mind. You need to have a few experiences in order to understand this. But I've come to realize that if there is no reflection, if you stay totally objective, you don't lose any energy at all. That's about it.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into the notion of detachment in Eastern philosophy and more specifically like Zen Buddhism of kind of like that detachment. But I just because I edited this part of our one of our discussions, but I think I like to go to if Lee's still there, his about the rover and anything you wanted to add to this. It's so funny that I just did that edit today. Um, remember that one talk we had, and he said you watched that one fuck the law of attraction about how you're not necessarily your thoughts in that sense, and that we get we attach ourselves to thoughts, and okay, we can move on. Nikki, did you want to bring up anything else?
Yeah, I think also quite often when we connect with something that we don't feel, that evokes a negative emotional state feeling within us, we often deflect from that thing immediately, and the deflection can often manifest as an unwanted habit or behaviour, like comfort eating or doing something, or drinking, or doing something that we consciously think, I don't want to do that, I don't want to keep doing that. I keep repeating that thing, or it can be a deflection as I keep going into that particular type of relationship with a person, and then it plays out in the same way. So quite often when people are not aware of their thoughts, or they're not completely conscious of what's happening, they will create these mechanisms of deflection from that feeling, as a form of a coping mechanism. So it's like a deflection. So on an unconscious level, they've recognized that they've reflected something. In other words, they've brought something into their reality as a reflection, as a mirror. It can be a unwanted interaction with someone, a communication, or play out as somebody being nasty to them or doing something not very nice, or in terms of communication with people. So what they do is they create a defense mechanism, which is a deflection from the reflection. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So they then they create this program, where they just keep going round and round in circles, ever decreasing circles, of these same behaviours that they are consciously aware of. Yet they're conscious that they do these things, and they're conscious in their head, they're thinking, I don't want to do this, so why do I keep doing it? Why do I keep repeating it? It's like when you have a conversation with someone and they say, they're talking about their life in a negative sense perhaps, and they're going, oh, I don't understand it, I just keep doing this same thing all the time, I don't know why I do it. You often hear people say that, well, I don't know why I do it, I don't know why I keep doing this. Because obviously they don't understand the program, and they don't understand how to deconstruct it, and it's just their defense mechanism that they've created to deflect from the reflection of their relationships, or of what they are decoding in their reality, which is like a mirror. Everything in this third density reality is like a mirror. The earth plane is like a learning experience, in a sense. It's like a learning school of experiencing the one consciousness, the one infinite consciousness, as separate, so we can learn from it. Which is why when we start to look at everything in this third dimensional earth reality, everything is connected. When we start to actually look at look at things, and look at the shape of a fruit or the shape of a flower, the geometry of things, and we start to see these connections. Exactly. We start to see all these connections and similarities. If we cut a tree trunk in half and we see how that geometry of that trunk is, if we cut our arm off and looked at the geometry of everything, the layering of the skin and the muscle tissue and all the veins that run through our bodies, and you start to see all these similarities because everything in this reality is connected. So therefore, everything is a reflection. All our relationships that we have with people, even not just long-term relationships of husband and wife partnerships, or long-term friendships or family members, even the tiniest, seemingly most insignificant relationships are reflections of who we are, of our consciousness. So, but obviously many people are going through their life and they don't have an awareness of that. They just see life as a series of different scenarios playing out that are either good or bad. And they don't kind of understand that they are creating it. They are drawing it in, by their
I think we're the
programs.
spirit of uh, uh, families. It's like my dog is my left foot practically. We have one mind, and we have the spirit of family, and we have the spirit of humanity, and these are, to me, very real things. And and the connections. We have quantum entanglements to throughout the galaxies, to other atoms, between our atoms and their atoms, and these quantum logical systems are not only on the tiny scale; they're on every scale. And the physicist Lou. Well, anyway, I got confirmation of that in the Cybercom group but in any case, the these quantum logical actions happen on a scale that's determined by frequency. So at the brain frequencies, we have this quantum logical action occurring, and necessarily, I mean, we couldn't stop it. And a lot of what we consider to be unconscious, I believe, is the quantum reasoning, where the quantum considers everything at once, as opposed to one thing at a time, as we do in rational thinking. But like we said, we have all these synchronicities, all these associations in there that are simply a matter of habit and are illogical, and they affect us in negative ways if they're not discovered and determined that they don't serve a valid purpose, that it's not, that our gut reaction is wrong for some reason.
Yeah, the quantum entanglement and these synchronicities happen kind of often when you kind of go with, let's say, your intuition or your gut, like a higher reasoning. But Kevin, do you want to relay some of your thoughts on what we've been discussing? I know we have had discussions about said topics, the non-duality and fractal nature of human expression and reality.
Sure. I definitely in coming to minds have found multiple occasions where a train of thought has been augmented through something, a trigger or some factor of connection through something, a different post or something to that extent. And like today was kind of a really unusual day. I woke up really early and just really was, I don't know if anybody else experienced this today, but was in a a groove with the Akashic field and really deep sentimental thoughts and relationships to my human condition, and became pretty apparent. But I'm getting some weird sound. So I don't know what that is. Yeah, and so it just, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but it just kind of struck me as, we're tied when we do come together in conceptual thought. We tend to grow to grow from that independently, but definitely entangled from a distance. So that's kind of my little bit of input for the moment. I kind of lost my train of thought. There's some weird sound in the background, so that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was kind of a message that was happening in the background. But hey, what's up, Corey? We haven't. You came in just in time when we started. But how are you doing, Corey? Are you there, Corey? Okay. So let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in again just for a little while to get back on the last sentence from Nikki. Um, when two people meet, there's a thing called soul contracts, and why people sometimes always get in the same situation or always find similar people. It's because there's something called the soul pulsion. It means the soul is pushing the ego to go in a certain direction for learning purposes. So I just wanted to add that to Nikki's last comment.
Actually, I'd like to jump in here. And I agree with you, Tech Lords, and perfect going where you were going with that. Like you were saying, the soul contract, we asked for the hardest tasks that we could be given in our contracts. And going back to the other point of how can you know happy without being sad, or vice versa, how could you be happy if you've never known any sadness? So we've been given the hardest test, and technically I'm thinking that we are entering our graduation phase, and I have this feeling that we are leaving this 3D and entering a 4th or a 5D. But another point that I wanted to bring up was in the Hermetic principles, if we know everything is a cycle and everything swings back and forth, one of the principles that you're supposed to try to attempt to do is to raise yourself up on the pendulum so that the swings aren't as dramatic. So you don't have the super swing to the super sad and then the super swing to the super happy. But if you raise yourself above that, as you swing back and forth, it comes and you know that it will go. So it's not as big an issue. And then they did talk about the 3 planes of existence and then 7 minor planes, and all of them having infinite degrees within each plane, but them, even though we call them 3 separate things, they're all the same plane. So, and that deals with the matter, the ethereal substances, and energy planes. But anyway, but yeah, thanks, Tex Lords, for bringing that up. I forgot about that.
I might be able to illuminate that a little bit. It's an odd sort of thing, but it relates to quantum logic, which is has unlimited dimensions, unlimited planes. But it does so by an odd trick of half-spin logic, which something turns around in 3 dimensions by going halfway around one way and halfway around the other way, turning around twice. It never really turns around. And so that's what they are talking about when they talk about the holographic universe. All the information of the universe can be put on one plane, and yet what emerges from that is dimensionality, or the illusion of dimensionality, depending on how you look at it, so that we have unlimited dimensions, unlimited planes of existence, quantum logically. But the planes arrange themselves such that we only observe as many planes as is necessary to represent the information. And as we add dimensions to a problem, we make it damn complex. People can't easily think in more than 3 dimensions, but they can think in 3 dimensions at a time. I hope that didn't confuse things.
No, that was fine. But I think I'm starting to come under the impression that time is actually not even linear anymore, and where we're in all points in time at the same time. And then our frequency or vibration manifests itself in this physical point in time that we're actually feeling or experiencing at this point in time.
Yeah, we're all, part of, essentially the timeline that began with the apparent Big Bang. And, we think of that as a common clock, but it's really not a common clock at all. It's, every local time is generated by events locally. So wherever you are, the time is dependent upon the frequency that things are happening where you are. If you're out in space, things are going to be happening faster, or time's moving faster than down here on Earth, because of the gravitational effect. If you're at high speed relatively, you're slipping ahead into the future. You can get anywhere as fast as you want to, but if you go 1,000 light years, you're going to get there 1,000 years later, even if it only took you 10 minutes by your clock. So time is not an a priori thing. It's constructed by quantum logical action locally. From a global perspective, okay, in the quantum, there is no time at all. And if you can take a global perspective, you transcend time, because we have a universe of equal and opposite action, and it adds to 0. And from the global perspective, in a sense, nothing happens. It's only because of a distorted time view that we see the action going one way or the other in time. But what happens in our realm is only caused by the things that have the same local time perspective as we do. So we have a local perception of what's happening in the time ordering. And the events that occur locally determine the possibility of events in the future within that the sort of the set of all possible universes, or the many worlds interpretation of the quantum.
If I could build on what you said.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Dan.
No, go for it, Holly.
Okay, I'll make it brief. Exactly what he was saying, that we're all in a vessel, we're traveling through time, but what we have to understand is that we are traveling in, what we perceive as time, but But basically what we are, I have definitely probably used this analogy before once or twice, so forgive me if you guys have all heard this one before, but I like to use the analogy that we're a vehicle, but we are in the vehicle. You know, kind of like going back to the concept that we're a rover, you know, with our minds and our spirit roving this body around wherever we go, and picture the vehicle as something like what we use in the modern day. It's a car. It's got a steering wheel. Our hands are on the wheel. We have a windshield. We have side view mirrors. We've got our foot on the accelerator, and every one of us accelerates at a different rate at a different time. Every one of us is unique in the way that we do that. We have a rear view mirror, and when we throw that all into perspective, the windshield is our window to the future, but we understand that we're at the wheel and we're in the now. We have a small window to the past, and we all know that if we check our rearview mirror too much, we can kind of get in trouble because we can lose sight of maybe a car or something that's coming up ahead of us that's slowing down that we might have to avoid or slow down for. Um, so it's two unique aspects, and so the first is that every one of our vehicles is absolutely unique, and our circumstances are unique. We all share everything with everyone else, but every one of us is absolutely unique in this. There's a conscious perspective where we know that we are all existing with one another. There's an anarchy that exists among everyone who drives who travels in an automobile to go wherever we need to go. And as long as we understand that we have that small window on the past, as Tech Lords puts it, the reflection on what's going on behind us, really we can keep in check, and we can keep hopefully at a very minimum, because we kind of have a sense of everything that's going on. It might be necessary every once in a while, but the most healthy perspective is just, and it actually depends on how clean our windshield is, how clean our side windows are. You know, it's I hate to put it in such an analogical sort of place, but if you break it down with everyone's unique perspective, if you imagine yourself as a traveler in an automobile with your hands on the wheel, the reflection is small, future is ahead of you. If you have a clear windshield, you know, you travel easier because you can see everything. And I honestly don't know where else I was going to go with that, but everything that everyone else said prior to when I came in really honestly brought me back to that analogy, and if we can all just remember that, but we're all traveling with each other on all the byways and throughways and wherever we're going, reflection is a minimum. And we're
It's a
all in
weird
it.
kind of sort of contradiction in terms, in a sense, because as we live our lives, as we go through life, we seem to move through some sort of series of now moments, if that makes sense. It's like when you look at life, you know, you look at the past, which I always, my own personal way of looking at it, in terms of a cache within within each individual consciousness or person, is kind of like, you know, the past is like a recording, documentation of a succession of now moments that have occurred, and the future is kind of a now moment connected to the now that you're in now, because you're thinking about what's going to happen in the future in terms of linear past, present, and future. So they're all connected. So there's kind of this weird contradiction that you live your life and kind of acknowledge that there's these different separate frames. You know, if you take the entirety of someone's life and think of it as a film, you know, you have a film and you can break it up into different frames, which are the recorded moments, the recorded now moments. And then, you know, if you were to sort of pause each frame of that film, which is your life, they would be the recorded past moments. And then obviously you'd have the thought process, which is still within the now, but is going to manifest as the future, which is obviously something that can always be different. It's not set in stone. There's no set in stone way that can play out. But the life as a film in its entirety is a succession of now moments, which is almost like saying it's separate, which is going into the linear thing, yet it's all in the one place. It's really weird, but that's always how I kind of look at it.
Yeah. So we're coming up to the hour and a half, and so I was maybe we'll bring up one more last topic to kind of get the discussion kind of closing or looping back around. Nikki, was there any last thing that you wanted to touch before we start wrapping everything up?
I mean, the only thing that I would say is the key thing in all of this for anybody is to try and establish some kind of harmony with, you know, the thought processes, the way things play out in our lives, and become more conscious of the process. I hate using that term process because it makes it sound all kind of like linear and like this is the way things have to be, and you know it has to be done in a certain order, which I don't agree with. But if we become more conscious of our thoughts and feelings, and you know, the thing is with the way society is, everything in society is kind of designed to distract us from thinking about ourselves, you know, which is so often, you know, with the whole scenario of people obtaining material things to identify who they are, or whether it's a religion or you know, I am whatever, I've got this, I'm in this income bracket, so that makes me this person, or whatever, which is obviously all ego related. That obviously deflects away from anybody looking at themselves, and because obviously we're so heavily indoctrinated into that the minute anything happens where we're, or if you lose, and this is another indoctrination in itself, if you lose everything, you don't have anything, then you're nobody, then you're a failure. If you become introspective, then that's a bad thing. Obviously depression is a bad thing, so we need to medicate that. We don't want you becoming introspective or thinking about anything. So I mean, the only thing that I would say in terms of everything we've talked about is that people need to become more conscious of their thought processes. They need to become more aware. They have to have more of a heightened sense of awareness, and understand that they can change the things that they don't want to feel so much, or they can not so much change, but they can kind of create a coping mechanism to deal with some of the things that are deemed to be negative. And at the end of the day, like Tech Lords was saying, if you can look at things from a place of neutrality, from a perceptual position of neutrality, so you're not, you know, there's no good or bad, it's all a learning experience. Everything on the earth plane, everything in the third dimension, third density, is a learning experience. So there is no good or bad. We're just indoctrinated or programmed to think that this is good and this is bad. If we can somehow get to this point where we think, well, actually, there is no good or bad. They're just experiences. We just learn from the experiences. I think that would be beneficial in terms of people evolving, you know, consciousness evolving.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing. Are you available, Nicola, for a counseling session?
Yeah, yes, I am.
URL you can give us? I mean, normally I'm pretty good at this sort of thing, but you know, I have issues with my life. I mean, the last 6 months, I quit cigarettes for about 3 months, and I've gone back to them. I know if I meditate, I can get over it, but I've developed a fear of meditation. So I'm really fucked up, and I need some help.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I was chatting to somebody earlier about how I was going to create a channel. I'm an artist as well, which is not actually relevant at this point, but I've got an art channel, and I was thinking about setting up another channel for all of this stuff. And as a few people know, I'm not very good at the technology side of things, but obviously I can, the beauty of the technology is I can do counselling sessions via the Skype, and, we don't have to be in the same country. So that's my next plan, is that in terms of minds and all of us connecting here at the moment, I'm planning on setting that up on Minds, but obviously I'm available to do the one-to-one counselling sessions for sure.
Yeah, well, we can invite you into the Divi and probably help you get set up, which
Sure.
is the community cooperative, and one of the main topics is how we can make better decisions, and this is very relevant to that process if we're going to act with a collective intelligence rather than the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go back to the kind of like fractal nature of how each individual, we go through this like pendulum of motion, and we all have said stuff that maybe we're not that we kind of suppress, and then we have these different things that maybe we use to deflect or to help code whatever it is, and it's a pendulum, and it's always kind of and we're just using pendulum as an analogy to try to convey a complex issue into more simpler terms so we can communicate it better. But that I think a big part of this is what Nikki was saying, is that we need to be more introspective to look towards for the authentic self, as Be Damn Smart brings up, because if you can't and this is kind of like the problem too at society at large, they don't look to self-correct where they get wrong, right? They don't like to be wrong, and to keep their power, they deflect onto different things, just as the smaller version of it, the scale down to the person does it, and you see these reflections throughout the human society, and gets us into this mess that we are in, and that we don't look at ourselves honestly, and we put up this facade, like, oh, we can't be wrong on this, or we got to show strength in this, or whatever it might be, and that we're not honest with ourselves individually or on the bigger scale of things. And it's to create this, as Techlers was saying, in the harmony. And this is where I think part of Infinite Imaginarium is to focus in on the introspective, but it's all tied into so this is the inner Imaginarium, right? And then to next week we're going to have the outer Imaginarium, where we're focused more on society and the scale up of it. But so I kind of want to go to EcoTorque. Thanks for joining in. But did you want to? I don't know if you were listening in earlier, but express any of your feelings on any of the stuff about working on the self, being in harmony with yourself, so you could be in harmony with society at large, or anything on that kind of topic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we do. You're coming in good.
Yeah.
A new headphone with a headset on it, so I just thought I'd try that out. Yeah, I have. I'm sorry, I've only just joined, so I don't really know at all what's been discussed beforehand. But the thing I really wanted to share in this discussion was a book that I read years ago. It's called The Therapy of Desire, and it's written by a woman, a Canadian philosopher called Martha Nussbaum, Nussbaum. And it's a book where she goes on a journey in Greece, in ancient Greece, and in ancient Greece had the different schools of philosophy. You had Plato, Euripides, Socrates, Aristotle, all these different people who had different styles, different teachings, different ethoses. And they wouldn't allow women into their schools of philosophy. It was only for men. So there were exceptions where a young woman who was of, say, noble birth would be allowed in, but she had to pretend to be a young man. So she sort of just pretend to be, just dress as a man, basically. So she goes on this journey through all the different schools of philosophy from that perspective of a young woman pretending to be a man in each of these schools. And she compares them and contrasts them. And she comes up with it's a great big thick book, and I read all of it. I read it from end to end. It's an amazing book. But she says then, out of all that, she says that the aim of philosophy is the curing of souls. What's a cured soul? A cured soul is happy, healthy, open, meeting other people down the street, looking at people in the eye, with a bounce in their step and a smile on their face. There's not many people like that. Very few, actually, when you walk down the street. And so then she asks the question, what is it that takes us away from this state of being? And she says it's the emotions. And then she makes a very broad statement, which I struggled with for a long time, but she says that all of the emotions, without exception, are based upon rationally held beliefs. And I struggled with that for a long time. I'll just say what she says, and then we can discuss it perhaps. She says there are 4 kinds of rationally held beliefs. There are true ones and false ones, and there are conscious ones and unconscious ones. So I prefer healthy and unhealthy to true and false, because true and false can get very subjective, but healthy and unhealthy is more sort of objective in a way. Healthy belief or unhealthy belief. So conscious belief is when we're responding to life, and an unconscious belief is when we're reacting to life. So if we have an unconscious belief which is unhealthy, then we're going to react in an unhealthy way to what happens to us in life. If we have an unconscious belief which is healthy, we're going to react in a way which is healthy. So the first one would be, when we go around those circles in life and we keep coming up against the same obstacle again and again and again, why the hell do I keep coming up in the same position emotionally, mentally in my life? I can't move, I'm stuck, I keep going round and round this circle. That's the first kind. That's an unconscious, unhealthy belief. Second one would be an unconscious belief which is healthy, which is where we arrive at some situation in life and we deal with it without really thinking about it in a healthy way. So that's all right, but we don't really know what happened. Then we've got conscious beliefs, and a conscious belief which is unhealthy is when we're going to respond in an unhealthy way, which would be like, I fucked up there, I know what I did, I'm going to try and do it better next time. And then a conscious belief which is healthy is where we respond in a healthy way, and we know what we did, and we know we did it right, and we know why we did it right, and that's the sort of ultimate aim to be. So then the whole aim of philosophy then becomes bringing up unconscious beliefs into consciousness and changing the unhealthy beliefs into healthy ones. And that sounds very simple, but the fact that the beliefs which are unconscious makes it very hard for us to deal with our own unconscious beliefs on our own. It's very hard, even in that period of introspection, which we all need. That internal dialogue can get very heated, to put it that way. And to try and find out the actually underlying unconscious belief is very hard. So that's when we can either co-counsel or we go to a counsellor or whatever. I don't know, does everybody understand what I'm on about there? Because I've just couldn't find the link to go.
Yeah. No, that was really good. We're gonna start wrapping things up, and what I like to do when we end stuff is to go around and kind of anybody expresses their final thoughts. And so actually I want to start, because it just happens to be on my display, with Tech Lords, Be Damn Smart, Nikki, Kevin, Jim, Holly, and then EcoTorque, and then I'll do a little send off. But so Tech Lords, last impressions or anything you want to really emphasize.
Yeah, well, like I wrote in the chat here, all experiences are good for the soul, but not necessarily for the ego. And the ultimate goal for humans is to put an end to experience. In other words, to put an end to the astrological programming. So that's my closing statement.
Very nice. Be damn smart.
Yeah, I do believe in the introspection part, because the I am which is you, you have to start there. You have to get yourself straight before you can start affecting others or manifesting out, because and then get in tune with authentic self. So those are the things we need to recognize. Those are the things we need to set triggers for. Those are the things that we need to express and start doing and being. And that's all I had.
Yeah, that's a big one to kind of look at yourself and try to connect to the authentic self. And that's actually how the there's an echo. But how this all started is with the 24-hour imaginary, and that was basically the whole premise for the 24-hour imaginary, which brought into this infinite imaginarium. And so, Nikki, your turn.
One of the things that I always keep in the forefront of my mind is becoming more conscious of everything that we're thinking and feeling. It, you know, becoming more conscious, bringing ourselves more into the now moment, so we have more of a heightened state of awareness of the program. So sort of picking up a little bit on what Tech Lords was saying, I kind of see it in the sense of you know, repeated occurrences, as in reincarnation. It's a bit like a pendulum swinging backwards and forwards, in the sense that you may have a life of, just to use an example of extremes, you may have a life of great importance and wealth and all this wonderful materialistic stuff and comfort, although you wouldn't be consciously appreciating it in that life. It would just be like, oh well, you know, this is the way it's always been. And then in your next life, the pendulum would swing completely in the opposite direction, to a life of great poverty or hardship, or, you know, abuse, or anything horrendous, you know, the two extremes. And it's kind of like this pendulum swinging backwards and forwards, and it's the key. The pendulum backwards and forwards is like the past and the future, the linear, three-dimensional thinking. And it's kind of to get the pendulum to stop swinging, so it gets to, you know, it gets to become still. So you're in the now, so the consciousness is in the now. And then once you become more conscious, you start to live lives of what I would say great importance, rather than, you know, what you've got in terms of material things or what you haven't got is irrelevant. It's about your consciousness. You start, in other words, you as an individual get, you know, the one infinite consciousness, if you like, gets a much better experience because you're fully conscious, and you come to a realization that there is no kind of good or bad. There are no extremes. There are, you know, they are all learning experiences. Once you can come to that realization and acceptance, you get off that, what they would call the wheel of reincarnation, and you can, you know, your consciousness will then elevate to what we, in terms of a linear sense, would say a higher dimension, but it's not higher, it's more expansive. You expand rather than going upwards or you know, downwards or whatever. You expand, your consciousness expands. So, you know, that would be, in that instance, your consciousness would expand from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. You know, the fourth dimension is kind of like a bridge in a sense, but that's probably another show. We could go into that in detail, but yeah, so you would expand rather than, so that, for me, it's about getting to that point of being comfortable with your own thoughts and being conscious of your own thoughts, and not having the need to deflect away from anything, which is obviously down to the ego. The ego would be responsible for making you deflect away from something. Being happy in your own thoughts, being aware of yourself is almost as if you were a separate entity. You can see yourself, on the outside, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I would want to say. It's about to condense it, the pendulum swinging backwards and forwards to those extremes. It's getting that pendulum to be still, so you're in that now consciousness state, and you're not letting any outward experience affect your state of mind.
Yeah. I think that's two kind of going on. What I thought real quick was that even if you don't have that introspective, I think a lot of times too the deflection or is being greedy because you're not all right with your state, and so you're deflecting it out to, oh, if I get these material stuff, then everything would be fine. But then because you're not in harmony, let's say, with yourself or with the environment that you're in, so you keep on trying to strive for that material stuff. Oh, if I get this house or this much money, and then that will solve all my problems, when you don't go to the root of the problems, which I think is kind of symbolic or problematic of us as society, where we find our situation in right now. But is Kevin still here, or did he go on that call? Okay, I think he had a call. But Jim, yeah, your last thoughts and impressions of what do you want to communicate?
This was awesome, and I think everyone, I think, contributed a lot. I guess I have a final comment on introspection, going back to the yin yang and nothing being good or bad necessarily, and sort of the whole circle of the dichotomy of I am part of the world and the world is part of me. And the smallest thing, the quantum bit of information, is the largest thing. It's the size of the universe that's entangled with the end of the universe. And we have this inner thing where we go from the human brain to the mammal brain to the reptile brain to the fish brain to the worm brain, and each in its own frequency range. And we can quiet our consciousness down to become the consciousness that beats the heart, and consciously control it if we want to. But we depend on the habit doing that process. The introspection part, I think, is important in self-understanding and meditation. But at the same time, you want to do the opposite. You want to grow outside the self, and you can sort of, this inverse relationship between size and frequency, or size and energy. This inverse relationship relates the small to the large, and there's a correspondence that we can keep in mind between the outside social intelligence or spirit and the inside intelligence. And with respect to time, okay, we project and we live, or we can project and live in the future. On the one hand, the dead past and the imagined future can affect us in the here and now, or shouldn't affect us in the here and now. But if we live in the future, okay, which nobody knows the future, developing and have better futures. And I cut off now before I tell you some more stories about that.
Yeah, introspection is key, but also to what you're saying about the balance between, your own introspection and then within the society and also the environment. And I think this is, hopefully, I think we need to progress in this, but it's kind of like that whole fractal development as we kind of individually progress with our introspection, that also the outer society is reflecting this with the new developments of how we're communicating and even building structures. And this is part of what the whole decentralized movement for me is about. And this is why we have the other part of Infinite Imaginarium is more of the social Imaginarium of how do we organize ourselves in a creative manner. But Holly, your thoughts?
Okay, sorry there. Just had to unmute. I've listened to everyone, and it's been really meaningful. I did have to take a break there for a few minutes, but I was able to catch up a little bit. And I guess the way that I wanted to leave this is that we're all left with the fact that, to touch on what I said before and expand on what everyone has said, we're all our own vehicle. And we all communicate and coalesce with one another, and we want it to be, I think we want it to be in a most meaningful way. Otherwise, it just creates discord. But the tools that we can use to implement everything that everyone has said tonight and really connect with ourselves, know ourselves, love ourselves, and be a meaningful part of everything that goes on within us and outside of us. I have found a lot of solace in just prana meditation, sitting with yourself and taking things in, doing a certain amount of reflecting, but reflecting on actually the things that aren't necessarily the bad things, but the things that we may have learned, and just being quiet. and once that happens, we slow our mind, our theta waves have a chance to kick in, and we can kind of move forward and make every relationship or encounter that we have more meaningful. So this talk has been very meaningful. It's also about the tools, the tools that we all need, which we're all our own vehicle, but the tools are pretty common because all our minds are pretty alike in biological ways. So thanks so much, you guys, for having us on. Lee had to duck out for the evening, so I'll say good night for him as well. And thanks, all of you. It was very good.
Thanks. And EcoTorque.
I'm not sure about this thing about becoming egoless. I do believe in a healthy ego. I've got 3 planets in Leo, so that might have something to do with it. I don't know, but I think we can align our ego with the universal will, if there be such a thing. I mean, look at the planets. They're all different to each other. They have an individuality, and without our ego, we're not individuals. We're all the same, and I celebrate diversity. I love the fact we're all different, and I hate that word equality because it can never work. Because as soon as somebody says you've all got to be equal, I'm going to stand up and say, well, I'm not. I'm different, and we're all different to each other. So then, as soon as somebody stands up and says that, whether it's me or someone else, then somebody else has to come along and impose equality on everybody. In which case, you've got the imposers and the imposed upon. So I can't see how equality can work, and that equates to me with this thing about the loss of ego. I think we just need to train our ego to behave itself, if you like, in society, so we can actually get on with each other and be creative and positive and interact in a positive way. So I just like to say that I don't hold with that as my end destiny in life is to become, I don't know, part of sunlight or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. One of the first kind of taglines I had for the Minds panel show is that I don't want hive mind, I want a mosaic of minds. So everybody, each individual creative spirit fits into like this jigsaw puzzle. But Corey, you came back in, but you're the last one. So any last things of your impressions or anything you want to say about the talk? Just anything, Corey. Don't don't overthink it. Just say it. Anyways, I like that Corey was on, even though he's not going to say anything. But this is actually have been a really crazy and jam-packed Infinite Imaginarium. But so as always, we're going to have Infinite Imaginarium on every Saturday. So maybe I know we could even probably use a service called Zoom to maybe expand the rooms. So for anybody listening and anybody on this panel, every Saturday, Infinite Imaginarium, and we're gonna oscillate every week. So one is gonna be Inner Imaginarium, which is Nikki kind of takes up the task for that, and then the Outer Imaginarium, which I'm taking up that role, and so look for the post in group, and we'll start planning the next one. And everybody's welcome to jump in, and even help plan it and do outlines of any topics you want to bring up. I like the input because it's very important to have different perspectives to break us out of our individual reality tunnels and our own blind spots and all this kind of stuff to kind of shock us into expanding our view of things. I think it's important. And thank you guys, everybody, for here. Bye.